and welcome to today's conversation, The Menopause Explained. I'm Jane Robertson. I'm the Director of Communications for Mental Health, Wellbeing and Inclusion Platform provider Frog Systems. And do, as always, put your questions in the chat if you can as we go along, and we will do our very best to answer them. Well, with women working later into life, awareness of the menopause has become increasingly important. It affects almost 9 in 10 women, and 10% end up leaving their jobs because of it. One of those women was Lauren Chiren. She left a senior role in financial services in her early 40s when she started experiencing what she thought were the early signs of menopause, or dementia rather, and she was subsequently told by her GP that she had just gone through menopause. She's now a coach on executive women's wellbeing, appearing on programs like Radio 4's Women's Hour to talk about menopause, and she runs regular training sessions on menopause awareness through her company, Women of a Certain Stage. Welcome to the show, Lauren. Thank you very much for joining us. How are you today?
Yeah, really good. Busy Friday and a beautiful day at the time of recording. So yeah, lovely to have the time to chat with you.
Good. Thank you so much for joining us. So perhaps, Lauren, we could start with your own experience. What made you think that you were suffering from early dementia? What sort of things were you going through that made you worried at that stage?
Yeah, it's interesting. I've got a bit of a portfolio here. So I started life studying double maths and computing and came out of university with a psychology degree. So I've always had a really big interest in the kind of mind, body, brain connection and human performance. I'm also, got quite a big sports background as well. I've always competed. So I've bopped in and out of the corporate world, and many things, like all of us, we have life things that happen, and everything that happened, no matter how big or small, I always coped, I always managed, and always found a way moving forwards. Then latterly, towards the end of my 30s, early 40s, I had my son when I was 37. And in my early 40s, I was a sole parent with a child with lifelong medical needs as senior exec in financial services, juggling global transformation projects and programs. I never thought twice about my situation. I just believed that I could get up and get out and go and do whatever I wanted to do. So no matter how complex the regulatory and compliance change work that I was delivering was, I thrived on it. I loved it. Nothing was ever too much. I was the person that sat in a board meeting and never took any notes because I could recall and remember everything, until the day I couldn't. And I found myself in one meeting, literally holding the arms of the chair, staring at the clock on the wall, waiting for the meeting to finish and everyone to leave the room so that I could use the wall Marcel Marceau light to get back to my desk, for fear of falling over because my heart was beating out of my chest. It was like anxiety. I had no clue what it was. I'd never really experienced that before. Another meeting, a board meeting I was sitting in, and I couldn't get the word plan out of my mouth. I could hear it in my head, but I couldn't get it out of my mouth. And I would sit with 4 cups of hot water when I'd go into meetings. My throat would close up so much that I could barely squeak words out. I found myself taking notes, going through notebooks upon notebooks upon notebooks, and then having to set alarms on my phone to remember to read the notes I'd taken to remind myself what to do next. And I became really, really dependent on my team to kind of spin me around and let me know where I had to be and when I had to be there. It was just a really strange time. There was one day I came home from work, put my bags down, said hi to everyone, turned around, picked my bags up to go back to work. Except in my head, I was going to work for the first time that day. Ultimately, my recall, my retention were absolutely shot. My self-confidence, self-esteem were knocked for 6. And to cut a very long story short, I left my job thinking I had early onset dementia.
So where did you go? Who did you talk to? Did you think to go to the GP at that stage, or as many, senior executive women who cope with all sorts of things, did you just decide to cope with it yourself when you left your job and you thought that leaving your job would solve the problem?
That's the thing, right? Because as women in the workplace, especially when you're in a male-dominated environment, you're so used to coping all the time and juggling all the things. And we get so good at looking after everything and everybody else, we put ourselves last. And then we wonder when we get into perimenopause and menopause, which I didn't know anything about back then, but we wonder why we've got nothing left over because we've stopped looking after ourselves. And also, I think we work really hard for our careers. And the environment I was in, I didn't feel like there was anyone I could talk to without being labelled as weak or vulnerable. And I certainly wasn't going to give anyone any ammunition against me. I was top leader in my team. I was getting awards, I'd got my bonus. Everything was going really well. but I didn't want to do anything that might tarnish that. So I never felt like it was a safe environment. I did go and see my GP, and it took 3 appointments, and he was amazing. He got it down straight away. First of all, he put me down as low mood, which was correct. I was in a place of having low mood, and he hadn't quite connected the dots. Bearing in mind I was early 40s. He then at the next appointment took some bloods, and when I went back thinking I was going to be told I had dementia, he turned around and said, "To be sure, Lauren, you've just been through an early menopause." And I was the happiest menopausal woman in Bristol, because in that minute, I'll take menopause over dementia any day. And that was the beginning of my journey into working with organizations globally to help them become menopause savvy.
The relief to have a diagnosis, that often happens with many things, obviously not just menopause, but it is knowing what it is gives you suddenly an ability to deal with it, doesn't it? And source the right support potentially.
Yeah, absolutely.
So from your experience and the subsequent research and training that you've done, you're a very focused lady, obviously, and so you decided to go down the route of finding more out. How do you now describe the menopause to other people and to other women when they're asking, what is it?
Yeah, so first of all, I want to just make clear that menopause is something experienced by women, by transgender men, depending when they've changed the intersex, gender questioning, non-binary colleagues. So we've got to be thinking about people rather than just women when we talk about menopause. And so with that in mind, then it's just thinking about the fact that there are certain times in your life when your hormones are going through significant changes, and menopause is one of those times. So if you think about all the things that go on for somebody when they're going through puberty, body shape changes, their smell changes, their attitude, their control of their moods might change. All of those things are happening during puberty because of big hormonal surges and changes. We expect that of our teenagers, and yet we don't expect that of people in midlife when they're going through the kind of hormone decline and things are beginning to change again. So we have to start just getting our heads around the fact that it's a biological change. It's an entirely natural event to happen for somebody, and indeed it can happen at any age. So menopause, the youngest recorded case was age 9 in India, and we know there's been several cases in the UK in teens and early 20s over the last couple of years. But there's other reasons why people might go through menopause. They might have treatment for endometriosis or fibroids. They could have surgical or medically induced menopause because they might have had cancer treatment, or they have had an oophorectomy or a hysterectomy. And all of these things can lead someone into menopause. When someone goes through a natural menopause, what that means is they normally will go through a phase called perimenopause, first of all. And perimenopause is when your estrogen levels are declining, and progesterone and testosterone. But mainly estrogen levels are declining, but not necessarily in a linear fashion. So it can tend to bob around a lot whilst it's falling overall. And that will have an impact on how you look, how you feel, how you behave, because estrogen plays roles in every aspect of who we are as a human being. So that means that during perimenopause, which can go on for 2 to 10 years, that your body's beginning to work differently. It's moving towards what it's going to be like post-menopause. So you might notice periods are getting heavier or lighter, they become closer together or further apart. You might notice your mood levels are changing, anxiety or low mood might be creeping in. All sorts of different symptoms could be coming along. Menopause itself is really just 12-month anniversary of your last period, your last bleed. So if you're on something, that stops you from having a monthly cycle, if you're on contraception, for example, that means you don't have monthly bleed, you might not necessarily know that you are menopausal. And definitely that was my case. After I had my son, I was put on contraception that meant that I didn't have a bleed. So I didn't know that I'd literally, we reckon, gone straight from having my son at 37 straight into menopause. So menopause is really just a moment in time. It's a 12-month anniversary of your last cycle. By that point, you've probably gone through a few years of perimenopause. You may or may not have experienced symptoms that have impacted your day-to-day life. And thereafter, you're postmenopausal for the rest of your life. The whole kind of symptoms phase tends to be between 2 and 15 years. Some women have symptoms that stick around much longer and potentially forever, but the majority of people will come through that. I think the key message that I always share when I'm working with organizations delivering training, or I'm working with individuals as part of my group coaching programs or one-to-one coaching, is that we can manage all these symptoms. We can absolutely stay on our A game. and it's knowledge is power. We have to start learning more about menopause earlier in our life so we can prepare for it and know how to ask for the right help and support.
And actually asking for the right help and support is critical, isn't it? Being able to have somewhere to go, either in the workplace or to a GP. And critically, when I was talking to a friend who's a health visitor about the subject that we were going to talk about today, she was saying that actually trying to speak to a GP who knows about menopause, who's maybe a specialist in menopause, because, not every GP, might actually be able to give you the correct advice at that first approach, potentially.
So the majority of our GPs are not trained in menopause. It's not part of their mandatory training in the 10 years of becoming a GP. So you'll be very lucky if you can find a doctor that's trained in menopause. The best way to do that really is to go onto the bms.org.uk website, British Menopause Society. They have a patient arm called Women's Health Concern, which is like a green box in the corner. And you can do a geographical clinic search to find out what is available, both private and NHS. Definitely go to an appointment prepared. That's the most important thing. So yes, if possible, ask for a double appointment. And as random as that might sound, and as difficult as appointments are to find right now, menopause is not a straightforward linear conversation because it's got so many different symptoms that it can be difficult for a GP to unpick what's menopause, what's depression, what's stress, what's anxiety, what's maybe a heart problem, a brain problem. And I come across too many women that have been for multiple scans and multiple tests when actually they were just going through menopause, and there's a much easier solution for them. So ask for a double appointment if you can. Make the appointment where you're most comfortable. So is it a face-to-face appointment, or is it a video or a telephone appointment? Where are you going to be most comfortable? You're probably already quite stressed when you're preparing for the conversation. So set yourself up for success. Keep a set of symptoms list for a couple of weeks beforehand. Make sure that you keep a list of your symptoms and note how each of them is impacting you on a day-to-day basis. It can be too easy when you're in a stressful situation like a doctor's appointment or talking to your employer or your partner. If you haven't got that list in front of you, you might forget about some of the things that are really important, and just one or two things pop up into your mind. Also, if it's a doctor's appointment, take along the NICE, the NICE guidelines in menopause, and make sure that if you believe that your doctor is not necessarily up to date, or you just want to get them on the same page as you, then help them just go through the NICE guidelines to look at. First line of defense is hormone replacement therapy. It might be for you, it might not be for you. That'll depend on your personal medical history. But at least you can both be on the same page in terms of what the potential solutions are. So with your symptoms list, your NICE guidelines, and then potentially take a list of questions in with you in paper and pen to write down the answers. Even when we're in the best state of mind, we don't always remember things that are said to us, at critical times. So do ask for the doctor that is most interested in women's health, specifically menopause, and just set yourself up for success. And equally, for those doctors that are trained in menopause, very often they will ask you to come back for another appointment, and having gone away to think about a number of different options. So it's not unusual, even from a really good doctor, to have two appointments before you walk out with a prescription, if that's what you're looking.
There's a really good list, actually, a checklist. I think it's Rock Your Menopause is a campaign website set up by one of the public health agencies, and they've got a very good kind of checklist which you can actually sort of fill out before and remind yourself when you're going for an appointment. So that checklist business, Lauren, is absolutely critical. You mentioned their partners. We'll come to the workplace very, very shortly, but what impact can it have on a partner and the rest of the family if somebody is going through menopause?
Yeah, it's interesting. So I just ran my free 3-day Menopause the Basics workshop this week, which I run every 2 months. And it was phenomenal to see how many men were on that session. So it's something that I set up in the pandemic when we could no longer run my in-person menopause socials. And, I've got menopause social groups all over the world, but with pandemic coming along, it was like, well, we can't run them anymore. So what can we do instead? And what's been really transparent over the last 8 years since I've been working in this space is that men are desperate partners. People that are not going through menopause are desperate to understand what it is. And so many times I run like men-only sessions in workplaces, and the conversations are fascinating. So there was one in particular that I was running a session in an engineering company, And the guys were all there. They'd been in their roles for 20, 30 years or longer. And one of the men said that at the beginning of the session, he said, I'm going to have to divorce this one as well. I was like, I'm sorry. And he goes, well, she's going the same way as the last one. I was like, tell me a bit more about that. Well, she doesn't want to do it anymore. You know what I mean? And she's really moody and she's just not fun to be around anymore. So we ran the session. At the end of it, he came up to me privately and he just said, you know, I'm so relieved to know that I can go and fix her. Now, he didn't quite get the whole conversation because none of us want to be fixed, and that's not what it's about. But the penny had dropped for him. He realised that it was just a passing phase. There was a lot he could do to listen and to support and to lean in. So clearly, you know, when you've been with somebody in a relationship for a period of time and you believe that you know them and they've got a normal pattern and flow of behaviour, and suddenly that behaviour changes. You know, I've had men say to me, I think my wife's having an affair. I had one man come up to me and say, I think you've just saved my marriage. And I had another man come up to me and say he'd gotten divorced a couple of months previously and he felt like it was the worst thing he'd ever done. Now that he understood what his wife was going through, he felt so bad. He'd gone to get in touch with her and he's kept in touch with me the last few years and he's actually started dating his ex-wife again. So it can have a devastating effect on relationships and in so many different ways. But it is about having the knowledge and having the skills to be able to communicate and have the conversation to figure out how you can support each other, because it is passing and usually you've got a lot tied up with each other, and with the right help and support we can absolutely, you know, boost our vitality, increase our influence and fully step into our power at this time of life.
So devastating effect on a partnership, on the rest of the family potentially, obviously, as a result of that. Let's turn to the workplace. Obviously, you've explained what happened to you and the decision that you then made to, you know, end working where you were. What is the impact that this? I think women over 50 are the fastest growing, you know, members of the workplace, aren't they? So there's a huge amount of people, the colleagues that you're working with, who may end up going through this or may be going through it at the moment. So what impact does it have there, and how can we support people going through menopause in the workplace?
Yeah, so women over 50, the fastest economically active group in the UK. We're growing at a rate much faster than men of that age group, which is interesting because it's kind of redressing the balance. So thinking about the fact that you might start going through perimenopause in your late 30s, which would be completely normal if you're going to hit menopause in your mid 40s. So we need to start thinking about the fact that we've gone through half our adult life when we hit menopause. We've got a whole other half to go. And if you think about what we've achieved by the time we get to menopause and all the skills, knowledge and experience and hurdles we've gotten over, we've got so much to give. There's just nothing, by the time you get this time of life, there's nothing that's going to rock you. You're going to be able to go out there and smash it. We've got so much to give back to our communities, our workplaces. So first of all, getting the mindset right about that and recognizing that in the majority of workplaces, they've been set up for men by men. And that's not criticism, it's just history. You know, Second World War, women went en masse into the workplace because men weren't there. War finished. And then women tended to retreat back to the traditional stereotypical roles. It's only in recent generations that women have started working longer and later into life and beginning to take on more senior roles. So if organizations are serious about gender parity and about having a good succession plan, having a pipeline of female talent right the way through to the most senior leadership positions, and getting away from where they are at the moment, which is lots of women who are in entry-level, junior, mid-level management positions, a bit of a gap, and then a sprinkling of women in more senior roles. If we want to fix that, we have to create a pipeline of women, which means that we have to make sure that we're creating work environments that are fit for purpose. We know that menopause symptoms are exacerbated by your working environment. We know your working environment and experience of work is exacerbated by menopause symptoms. So we also know that, you know, upwards of 900,000 women have left work believing they can't get the right help and support and stay in work during menopause. And we're anticipating that over 1 million women are going to be leaving in the next year or two as well. At least 10%, depending on which surveys you read, at least 10% of women do leave feeling like they can't continue. And it all comes down, in the majority of cases, just to the lack of knowledge and support of how to get the right help. And that's ridiculous. You know, we worked really hard to get to where we are. So for anyone going through menopause, being educated, not just the person going through menopause, but everyone around them, because you might be being managed by someone, you might be managing somebody, you might be, for example, in your teens or 20s, a graduate, and still living at home with someone going through menopause. It might be your partner that's going through menopause, but all the stress of that and the changes in the dynamics of relationships will impact your performance at work. So getting the whole workplace educated about menopause is vital. That is the basis. And there are so many different ways we can do that, right? So it's meeting a company where they're at, understanding their culture, and seeing how we want to move that culture forward to become menopause-savvy and menopause-inclusive. Making sure that when you look through your employee assistance programs, you look at your private medical insurance, you look at your occupational health, HR, line managers, they are all actually menopause trained. Because what we don't want to do is have mental health first aiders or EAPs and occupational health who are not menopause savvy, and then they just send people off to the doctor, and they send them off to a doctor who is not menopause familiar, and they don't get the right help and advice. Often people will be put on antidepressants, and whilst they might be useful and helpful, it's not necessarily treating the right body symptom. So it's important that we check our EAPs, our occupational health, HR, line managers, make sure everyone, including inclusion, diversity, and well-being, everyone is menopause aware. We need to also be really clear about the responsibility from an employer versus the employee. So the employee has to, make sure they're educated and aware of what they can do. The employer has to create the environment and the right signposting. And it's very important to communicate, where that line is as well, because you can't force someone to the table to talk about this stuff. And not every person going through this wants to talk about it either. So it's about raising awareness. It's about making sure we've got the right mechanisms in place to signpost people accurately. It's understanding that this is going to improve your retention. It's going to improve your attraction of talent. It's going to increase your employee engagement, your productivity, your performance. There are so many benefits that once you start going on the journey of becoming a menopause-savvy organisation, that you're going to see all of this coming up. We haven't even touched on the parliamentary inquiry. So, depending when you're listening or watching this, in May, hopefully 2022, we're going to see the report with recommendations on menopause in the workplace come out.
Yeah, I noticed that I think it was yesterday there was a piece that came out saying something like 600 employers have signed a pledge to make their workplaces more menopause friendly. Things like, helping to pay for HRT if it's needed, paid leave, even to the point of, I think it was Tesco were going to look at the way the material that they use in their uniforms to make them kind of more friendly, as in, that you don't sweat so much if you're getting hot flushes and all the rest of it. But as one of the menopause charity CEOs said, that's all very well, but the culture of the organisation is the thing that needs to be looked at. A policy's not going to change it. The whole culture needs to come into play.
Yeah. And I agree with that. And I think companies that are doing good work in this space are using the sound bites that go down well with the press. And that's great because they're taking steps in the right direction. But you've hit the nail on the head. It is about that cultural change. It's about living and breathing this stuff. It's not about tokenism. But we do need to, like, I work with the MOD, I work with the police, and a lot of them are changing the undergarments of their uniform. They're looking at the different fit of the uniforms as well, so that they are more breathable and they're more conducive to someone whose body is fluctuating and changing. So that is really important. It's important to look at the different role types as well. And, we just accept what is. We don't question stuff around us. And people say, oh, I can't change this, I can't change that. I work with organizations who during the pandemic, they've completely refurbished their workplaces. And they've got lots of quiet spaces in, not for menopause, but quiet spaces because we recognize that as human beings, sometimes we just need to go and gather our composure to get our thoughts together. And it's also the clients I've worked with longest don't necessarily have separate menopause policies anymore. They might have a whole health policy. And it's a case of, if you need time off, come and talk to us. And let's record what it is that you are needing time off, because if we can monitor that, then we can get some metrics. We can understand, when we analyze that, we can understand what it's telling us. And then we've got better understanding of what we need to change and what we need to put in place. But so few organizations actually record metrics to their own benefit. And that's the bit that we need to shift as well, because what gets measured gets done, right?
Yeah. So if somebody listening here today is feeling that they're possibly going through menopause or starting to experience symptoms that might end up being diagnosed as menopause, how do you approach that from your point of view in the workplace? It's not that easy always, is it, to go to the boss and say, oh, by the way, I think. Have you got any advice around that, Lauren?
Someone speaking up about their own journey.
Yeah, being open enough or confident enough to go and have that conversation with somebody in HR or their line manager or whatever.
Yeah, I think there's a number of factors to that, and the challenge is that when you're going through a menopause, if you are in a position where you feel you need to have a conversation about it, the chances are you're feeling vulnerable already. So the types of things that often my clients will tell me are reassuring to know are the fact that actually under health and safety 1974, your employer's got a duty of care to make sure they're creating, a risk assessment of your working environment, making sure it's fit for purpose for you. And also with the Equality Act, if you're experiencing throwaway comments and that could be construed as bullying and harassment, that you're covered for that as well. Also, we know that looking at the existing cover and protected characteristics of disability, age and sex, not that we're saying menopause is a disability, it's not. However, because of the way the wording of the regs, you are technically able to ask for reasonable adjustments, to have a conversation with your employer to explain to them what your experience of menopause is. And much like you would do with a doctor, go in prepared, go in with your symptoms list, explain what's going on for you, know what you're going to ask for. Put your case forward to say, look, I've been here, I've had my career for X amount of time. This is what I bring to the organization. I'm struggling a bit right now with X, Y, and Z. I believe that with these adjustments, I can carry on. And I'm just looking for a bit of support during this time whilst I just readjust. And know that you do have cover from the regs. I think that potentially just going in and keeping a record of everything that you feel is being impacted as a result of menopause and having an open, honest conversation, and make sure that you just state that you want it to be confidential and just follow up, just keep on following up because things change.
Listen, thank you for that. Lauren, we could spend another hour or two speaking about this, and I know we're short on time today. We did touch on HRT a little bit earlier, and I know that's a big conversation, and neither of us are medical experts, but we did have a couple of questions that came in along those lines. So if you don't mind, I'll just ask them and we can discuss them in a kind of non-clinical way. But we had one question which was just talking about, how long do I need to take HRT for? I'm assuming that the person has maybe been given HRT. Hopefully they would have been given advice from a GP, but is there a right or wrong specific period that people end up taking our HRT for?
So clearly, without knowing any background, can't give any personal responses. And as Jane said, we're not medical experts. I have done the medical training on HRT on menopause. And if you read the NICE guidelines, which are scheduled to be updated, but currently they will say you should be on HRT, the lowest dosage of HRT for the shortest amount of time that you need to manage symptoms. However, if you speak to the consultants, the specialists in this area, they want to get everyone on HRT as early as possible and get people to stay on it for as long as possible. And their, the research is showing us that the health preventative benefits, bone health, heart health, and potentially brain health as well, are overwhelming. And that I'm muddling my words here, menopausal moment. But basically, what we're talking about, menopause, is just a hormonal shift. So actually, if we can put hormones back into our body, we can maintain our bone, heart, and brain health. So there's a big chasm between the guidelines and what people leading in this space are saying at the moment. But always go back to the doctor and have a conversation.
Yeah. Check with the doctor, definitely. And another question, a statement really. There's a world shortage of patches. What are the alternatives?
Again, definitely go and speak to your doctor. There's so many different formulations of estrogen now and progesterone and testosterone. So, go back and speak to your doctor and just look at what the alternatives are, or speak to your local pharmacy. They're probably going to be just as good to give you some top tips because they know what's going to be in stock.
Excellent, Lauren. Listen, thank you. One final question from me, and this is possibly a little bit of a silly question, but is there a positive menopause experience?
Yeah, I mean, it's the best thing in the world, right? You get to the other side of menopause. I mean, the thing is, if we were educated and we knew how to support ourselves, it wouldn't be an issue. For me, becoming menopausal is an absolute privilege. It's a badge of honor. How many people don't get to live this long? No longer have to worry about monthly cycles. No longer, worrying about all the ups and downs that come with periods. And you get to the other side, and be honest, most of the postmenopausal women I work with don't give a monkey's about, don't sweat the small stuff anymore. So for me, it is brilliant.
Lauren, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been a fascinating half hour, and we could talk about this subject all day long. Please visit Lauren's website, Women of a Certain Stage. Just briefly, Lauren, you also run your free sessions, don't you? So look out for those via social media. Would that be the best way to do that?
You can go on to womenofacertainstage.com. The Menopause Champion, Menopause Coach, and free courses will all be on there.
Great, lovely. We'll put all those links when we send the email out with the recording, the link to this recording. And for any of you who are watching who have got our wellbeing platforms, we've put lots of resources and links to support organisations on those platforms. So if your business or organisation has one, please just search for menopause. If you're interested in finding out a little bit more about what Frog Systems does, please visit our website, and you can follow us on our social media. Interestingly, we share quite a lot of videos on our TikTok and Instagram accounts. It's the same name, Frog Systems, with lots of lived experience chat about menopause and lots of other different subjects. As I say, we'll no doubt return to this subject in the coming months, and we'll be popping an email out to you all with the link to this recording very shortly. So please do enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you very much for joining us, and do take care of yourselves. Bye-bye.